Since it's 6 o'clock, I think we'll get started. I would like to welcome you all this evening. My name's Kathy Conway, and I'm one of the co-facilitators of Southern Oregon Climate Action Now. And the other one is Alan Journet, sitting next to me. If you have not muted, if you could do that, that would be great. Our topic tonight is election 2022. Now what? And in a moment, I'll introduce our speakers. Before we do that, I briefly want to cover a few Zoom tips asking you to mute yourself if you haven't. If you have questions, if you could type them in the chat, and Ellie will ask those at the end of the three presentations tonight. And if you want to play around with screen options, go to the upper right-hand corner. That doesn't affect the rest of us, just you. You can select the view you want, whether it's side-by-side speaker or gallery. And as you probably know, the presentation is being recorded this evening. So the plan is we'll have the presentations from our two guests this evening, and then we'll have questions at the end of that. And then I'll finish with just a brief few minutes with SOCAN activities and those of other groups. So what we're doing tonight is looking at after the election, now what? And Alan is going to talk about local and federal results. And following him, Pam Marsh, our Oregon Legislative District 5 representative, will talk about the state level. And then Warren Kahn is going to finish. He's a senior trainer with More to Life, and he's going to share with you an opportunity we have coming up in January about mastering the art of difficult conversations. So with that, I will stop sharing and we'll go ahead and let Alan start us off tonight.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Kathy. As Kathy said, my task is to talk to you about local and federal outcomes of the election. So I'm going to talk about what's been going on in the cities around the Rogue Valley, and then we'll talk about federal stuff. So let's start. Ashland was very great outcome in Ashland. 3 candidates with strong commitments to climate action won their city council races very handily. That augurs very well in Ashland for a revitalization of the Ashland Climate and Energy Action Plan. So we're looking forward to seeing that reappear passed in 2017. In Talon, a team of Republicans closed themselves in as Democrats and ran to reverse the efforts by the current mayor and council to promote climate action and energy action in Talon. The wolves in sheep's clothing lost, and so the good guys won. So Talon is still going strong in its climate action arena. Phoenix, unfortunately, I don't have any information or intelligence on the candidates who won and how they are likely to influence Phoenix's potential action in the climate arena. In Medford, there was a general pattern of victory by candidates following the no action school of thought, making the likelihood of meaningful action just a little more remote. In Central Point, again, I don't have any information or intelligence, and I would encourage anybody who has some information or intelligence on what's been happening in Phoenix and Central Point in the elections. I'd really be delighted to know. I did learn that Eagle Point is not really making a lot of progress in the climate arena. That's not going to be a surprise. Jacksonville seems to have favored the status quo in terms of the election of candidates for the city council this time around. In Grants Pass, it remains unclear how the elections may have modified the reception of the council to climate action through the Sustainability Task Force efforts. Intel suggests there might have been a little swing towards the culture wars in Grants Pass. We hope not. If we come down to the Jackson County Commission, some of you may have been following the race there, a couple of races there. We had a couple of candidates running for the county commission who were very interested in bringing climate action to the Jackson County Board of Commissioners. Unfortunately, neither of them was elected, so the Jackson County Board of Commissioners is going to stay pretty much solidly in the arena of the rejection of science, whether it relates to human health or climate. And if we have a look over at Josephine County, essentially the Board of Commission retained its somewhat strict head in the sand perspective. They had a really great candidate running for the commission who unfortunately didn't make it. I do want to make a plug now for SOCAN's County and City project. This is a project that started 18 months, 2 years ago. And we have now action teams in Medford, Grants Pass, and Jacksonville, and we'd very much like to crank up an Ashford team, and also Phoenix and Central Point and so forth. So if there's anybody out there who's interested in joining one of the active teams in Medford, Grants Pass, or Jacksonville, please let me know, shoot me an email, alan@socan.eco, and we'll make sure you get on the list. Okay, I'm going to slide down now to the federal level. You probably, if you've been following the federal election, and I'm guessing most of you have, you will know that the Senate now is 50 Democrats, 49 Republicans, with Georgia's still pending. And that's going to be a rather important runoff election. In the House, the federal House, we have 220 declared Republican winners, 213 declared Democratic winners. 2 seats were pending the last time I looked. Unless something weird happens in Arizona, that's probably going to end up as 222 Republicans to 213 Democrats. Republicans seem committed to terminating Nancy Pelosi's House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. The GOP plan includes bolstering oil and gas mining and, strangely, hydropower. The current Select Committee chairwoman is Kathy Castor of Florida. She has stated Republicans seem eager to go down a path of increasing sweltering hot days, gutting clean air protections, padding the profits of big oil, and refusing to take a serious look at the cost-cutting potential of clean energy. At a recent hearing of that committee, Republicans doubled down on claims that the Biden and his administration's Inflation Reduction Act promoted policies that have been hurting American families by failing to enact strategic reforms needed to support a clean, reliable, and affordable energy future. Ranking committee member and presumptive chair Graves of that committee stated, "We have been clear in this committee. I think the chair and I share the objective of a trajectory that is lower emissions, that is more diverse, cleaner energy portfolio, but making sure that we do so in a way that is based on US resources, that is efficient, that continues the trajectory of downward emissions in a way that looks globally, as the United States has led the world in reducing emissions." There seems to be an acknowledgement here that emissions reduction is a laudable goal, but is it real, and does it accurately reflect GOP beliefs regarding the climate crisis? Given the GOP history, many of us remain skeptical. A key question here is whether the GOP will have time amid all the impeachment hearings they have promised to even consider the climate crisis. However, maybe we should focus on the positive, the apparent acceptance here of climate science, and maintain optimism of some rapprochement between those who have accepted the imperative of action and those who historically have seemingly denied it. And I'm going to make a pitch here. If there are folks out there who are interested in engaging with SOCAN's federal and state project team, again, please let me know and I'll make sure you get on the list. Again, shoot me an email, Alan, ALAN, @socan.eco. And I am going to wrap up And I am going to throw the ball to Pam, star of stage and screen and the SOCAN 10th anniversary. Over to you, Pam.
I think star of Zoom, actually, for tonight's purposes. Anyway, I am very glad to be here with everyone. Just in case we don't know each other, I'm Pam Marsh. I'm the state representative from District 5, which is Southern Jackson County. My district is the Green Springs, Ashland, Talent, Phoenix, a little corner of Medford, as you kind of take a left-hand turn and go out toward Jacksonville, and then at Jacksonville and most of the Applegate. That's my official district. We all work together in the Rogue Valley. So if I can ever be of use to you and you don't live in my district, please do not hesitate to be in touch regardless. So we have some good news after the election at the state level, and it starts with the governor that we've elected, Tina Kotek, and I hope you all voted for her. If you didn't, you should still be grateful that she got elected. Was the only one of our candidates who had expressed interest in the issue of climate. In fact, the other two candidates who are running not only did not have an expressed interest in climate, they had an expressed disinterest in climate and had made public commitments to actually start disassembling some of the things that the state has in place. So the fact that we elected Tina is a huge step forward and a very positive sign that we'll be able to move the needle further on climate action. So thank you for all of you who took an effort to give money or tell your friends or do anything. We are very glad about that election. Along with that, we had good news at the legislative levels. Both the House and the Senate will maintain Democratic majorities. We won't have super majorities, which means that you can't have a single party approve a tax. But that's probably not a wonderful outcome anyway. When you're doing big work around taxation, you really want bipartisan shows of support. The fact that we have solid majorities in both the Senate and the House really gives us the ability to pass some good legislation, even at least that is not associated with increase in taxes, and should allow us to have a green light on moving forward some of our really important climate work. I'm optimistic. We've set the table correctly. I'm also optimistic that we are going to have the leadership determination to move efforts forward. I mean, climate was one of those areas in which the governor-elect really distinguished herself. She called out the fact that she was the only one of the three individuals who are running who had an interest in a record and a commitment to climate. Having said that, having garnered votes based on that messaging, I think we now have a governor who is going to be very receptive to what we put forward. So let me give you some ideas now of what kind of legislation I think might be moving forward. And by the way, I currently serve as chair of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee in the House. I expect to keep that position, although nothing is certain until we actually get committee and chair assignments. But all the climate legislation that we'll see in the state will likely come through my committee. So I feel like I do have generally a pretty good idea of what might be heading our way. So let me share some of that with you. First, we will have legislation implementing recommendations that come out of the Rebuilding Task Force. A little bit of background is probably in order for you to understand what that is. In 2021, we had legislation called the REACH Code, which would have enabled cities that choose to do so to implement more rigorous energy efficiency standards in their building code. That bill, while we thought it was just a little push forward, turned out to be a very controversial piece of legislation. And it became clear in 2022 that bill in any form was not going to move forward. So instead, leadership worked with the chair of the Senate Environment Committee, Senator Kate Lieber, now the majority leader over there in the Senate, and put together a bill which established a rebuilding task force. We have Senator Lieber and myself chair that task force. We have 27 members who represent labor, electricity industries, utilities, gas utilities, architects, climate affiliates, a whole range of people. And we have been working diligently for about 6 months to come up with recommendations. The goal here is to note that buildings as a sector are an incredible portion of our greenhouse gas emission budget. Probably the estimates range generally around 40% of our emissions coming from the building sector. So to the extent that we can identify and implement strategies around existing buildings and new buildings to provide ultimate energy efficiency, to decarbonize those buildings, we can provide for multiple benefits. First of all, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's, I think most of us would agree, the most important element here. But we can also achieve incredible energy efficiency. And there are multiple benefits as well in terms of contributions to the health and safety of the occupants of those buildings. So the Rebuilding Task Force is nearing our end. We today, in a meeting this afternoon, looked at our draft report. Those recommendations will be finalized at our meeting in December. And Senator Lieber and I will be putting forward legislation that implements various of those recommendations. We have yet to decide exactly what's going to be in those bills, but you can expect that we'll have a significant focus on electric heat pumps, programs to make sure that we get electric heat pumps out to Oregonians. We'll look at retrofits. It's very clear that retrofits of existing homes can not only provide for energy efficiency and save money for the occupants, they can also really help us with when we start to look down the road at peak energy demand, because when we decrease the amount of energy that is necessary to cool or to heat a home, and we do that on a widespread basis, we will have a significant, very positive impact on the amount of power that's actually necessary to take care of our homes. We're also going to look at navigation. And this is something I want to spend a few minutes talking about because I think it's a really important element of the work that we put forward. We have right now at the state level multiple programs, some of which we passed in the last couple of years, including our Healthy Homes program, which enables us to invest in critical repairs, including energy efficiency in homes. Our electric heat pump program, which we passed in 2022, that's a program that's just getting underway under the auspices of the Department of Energy. We have weatherization monies that are administered by the Oregon Housing and Community Services. We have energy incentives that are dispersed by Energy Trust for people who are customers of Pacific Power or PG&E. And other kinds of incentives for people who are customers of our municipal utilities or our consumer-owned utilities. And now we have the IRA coming our direction. This an enormous piece of federal legislation that holds tremendous, even overwhelming promise to bring benefits to our communities. So as we look at this array of programs, it's going to be really incumbent on us to figure out how we as a state and as communities can go about setting up systems to help potential customers, including an individual resident or a community or a small business, to understand how to access these various sources of funding and how to put them together to get the benefits that they may want in their home or their business, to get those retrofits, to pay for an electric heat pump, to do general upgrades on a home or a facility. So we are currently thinking through what a navigation system like that would look like, because we need to be prepared for the money that's coming our way. And we also need to make sure that the existing state programs that we have are complementary, that they're working together, and that we make it as easy as possible for residents or business owners to apply for and to receive funding from a variety of different sources. So a lot of work underway to figure out that whole question of navigation and how to really maximize the way we organize ourselves to enable us to get the most we possibly can out of the federal money. So that first arena of rebuilding, you're going to see a lot of talk and a lot of interest in, I think, in the upcoming legislative session. A second area we're going to be doing a lot of work in, I think, is around renewable energy sources. You all know that in 2021, we passed House Bill 2021, which sets the state on a course toward 100% clean or renewable electricity by the year 2040. In order to get there, we need to do a lot of work on individual renewable energy sources so that we make sure that we have a supply of those non-fossil fuel sources and that we are deploying them in the most efficient, best use kind of strategies. So I think you will see legislation around the siting of energy facilities. We know that land use questions can be an issue when you are looking to locate, for example, a wind farm or a solar farm. We want to look at those siting issues and see if there's ways to ease the barriers while still protecting the land use system. We're going to want to look at strategic use of specific sources. We will have in my committee a bill that requires the Department of Energy to look, for example, at renewable hydrogen and to tell us how it makes sense to use renewable hydrogen. We know that there's going to be a lot of federal tax credit and support for the development of that product, but we need to make sure that we're really approaching that in a thoughtful way that makes sense for our energy system as a whole. I think we'll have a bill that requests that the Department of Energy do, in fact, a large energy strategy effort for the state, looking at all the different sources of energy that we can draw upon and helping us to understand what's a reasonable prediction of product out of any one of those areas for when they might come online and how they should be deployed so that we really have a framework for moving ahead on the renewable energy front. And so that's the renewable energy sources, a lot of work to do there to make sure that we can really meet those goals that we set out in House Bill 2021. A third area I think you'll see work on is simply affirming the state's climate goals and updating them, and also looking at placing some portions of the Governor Brown's executive order into statute. So some of you will remember a couple of years ago, after walkouts meant that we failed to pass our cap and invest legislation, the governor stepped up and did a far-reaching executive order. I know you've talked about that probably multiple times here at SOCAN. But it's an executive order, and the fragility of that was very apparent during the election because we knew that if somebody who wasn't Tina Kotek got elected, that they would dismantle the executive order, and it's not in statute, so they could do so. So I think you will see efforts to put some of that executive order into statute and give it a more heft and some protection. Next, I think you'll see action on the whole question of resiliency. And when we talk about resiliency, we have sometimes a lot of different things in mind, but I'm talking specifically about resilience in our utility sector. So a lot of interest in microgrids and in making sure that our big utilities are as resilient as possible when we have wildfire, for example, really threatening our ability to keep the lights on. We also want to talk about resiliency in terms of support to local communities. I have a bill that I'm hoping gets some consideration in Salem that would establish resilience hubs or resilience networks. We know what disaster looks like in Southern Oregon, and we know that recovery takes a long time, and that it makes sense to have in place an ongoing effort to first, in the times when we're not addressing climate disaster, to be able to bring people together, to build connection with each other, to help people be as strong and resilient as possible. And then when an emergency comes along, to have a place where response can be provided immediately. Then post the disaster, to have a place where recovery is centered until recovery is complete. And then you go back to the beginning of that cycle where you have an everyday effort to build resilience so that when disaster comes along, you're as prepared as possible for that. So I think a lot of work around resilience. And lastly, I'll just note forest policy. We passed with tremendous efforts by Senator Golden, Senate Bill 762 last year, which set into effect a $200 million forest policy package that addressed resilience, addressed suppression, addressed protection. We need to renew some parts of that. We need to fill in some gaps. And I think you'll see an omnibus bill come forward that does just that. So that's a quick summary of the significant areas that I see coming forward. Bills are really in process right now. You'll start to see them You'll start to see them filed probably in December. There will still be more bills that come out later in January. Last year in 2021, when we passed House Bill 2021, we didn't have a bill until about 2 months into the session. So although you'll hear a big flurry of things getting released immediately, stay tuned because we'll be working on legislation for the first couple of months of the session. And that's happy to answer any questions if we get to that point and have time.
Thank you so much, Pam. I see the questions are popping up, but we'll go to Warren next. Representing a little different form of action that I hope some of you are interested in. So Warren, do you want to go ahead and share your thoughts?
Sure. Well, hello, everybody. This is my first time attending a SOCAN meeting other than when we've had prior to the election, where we had the candidates having statements and everything. And I've been a climate change environmental activist for many, many, many years, but I've only lived in the Rogue Valley now for almost 3 years. And so first of all, I want to acknowledge everybody that's in attendance here, and you know, we share a care for our planet and our earth and all the living things and the beauty that we've been bestowed upon to live in such an amazing place. And a little bit about me. I'm a More to Life senior trainer. More to Life is a nonprofit international educational foundation, and I do personal growth courses and experiences all over the world. For example, I've been to South Africa on 8 tours, where I go from through 3 cities, and I deliver personal growth experiences, where you'll have 50 to 100 people in a room, intensive work on healing and self-esteem and keep giving your word and keeping it and finding the purpose in your life, all those kinds of things. And I'm one of less than 10 senior trainers in the world that have become experts in this technology that we've been handed to and gifted with from our previous founders. And one of those areas of expertise is in communications. Now, for example, one of my tours to South Africa, I could literally have somebody who was part of the apartheid movement, you know, a soldier that actually had to shoot students that were running in the townships of Soweto, sitting next to a person who had somebody shot during those riots. If you know about it, remember the history of apartheid. And so to have those 2 people sitting there, both needing healing, both needing, you know, resolution, both needing to heal between each other, and by the end of the weekend, having those 2 people hugging and exhibiting love and connection and forgiveness and all of those things, when they came from completely different points of view and backgrounds. And so as I look at, I recently saw in the election stuff, a map of Oregon depicted with how much of it is red and how much of it is blue. And it looks like this huge sea of red. And there's these little pockets of blue that, of course, are the major cities where the populations are larger. And so we live with many, many people who don't share our points of view. And although we had some good results in our election, good according to our points of view, there's still, in the reports that we've heard, there's still a lot of resistance. There's still many of our neighbors that see things very differently. And in all my experiences of delivering trainings to thousands of people all over the world in different ethnicities and different parts of the world, different cultures, basically what I found is that people want basically 3 things. They want to belong, they want to matter, and they want to be safe. And so even if we have people that don't share our environmental points of view or political points of view, they have families, they have fears, they have concerns just like us. And so when I look at it that way, I don't want to just talk to people that agree with me. We live in a democracy, we live in a country now that is very divided. And one of the things that would be very helpful, I believe, in promoting our environmental concerns is not only speaking with those of us who share the same points of view, but how do we reach out? How do we share things with our neighbors? How do we, converse, dialogue, and not miss each other? And so one of the areas of expertise that I have and that I use in my trainings is these communication techniques. It's called baseball. And you'll learn more about it if you choose to come to the trainings that I'm going to offer in January at no cost to the SOCAN activists. Basically, how many of you have tried to converse with somebody that has a very different point of view, and how well has that gone? Has it gone really well? Did you get to consensus? Did you end up hugging and thinking, boy, that's really helpful? I see somebody going, no, and, so there are things where our skill sets to be able to dialogue, to be able to hear other points of view, other belief systems, other people have different sources of news or alternative facts or whatever, how it's come into being. How do we speak with those folks? Because they're all around us. They're our neighbors. They're our fellow citizens. And we share this planet. And even though I might be recycling or I might want an electric car, there are many people who say, screw the environment. We want to have more business and have more profit and those kinds of things. But I believe at the heart of the matter is they still have their fears, concerns, wanting to belong, wanting to matter, wanting to be safe. And so what I'm going to offer into the SOCAN community is a 2-afternoon, 3 hours on a Saturday and 3 hours on a Saturday, the Mastering the Art of Difficult Conversations. And we're going to learn some techniques, and we're going to practice some of these techniques. And we're going to identify our trigger points, what gets us elevated to the point where now we get louder, they get louder, we get louder, they get louder until we slam the door and it's over. Or we shut up and don't speak anymore and just avoid the whole thing. Because if we don't have that dialogue, it's going to be difficult for us to achieve our goals, especially with environment and climate, because it's something that everybody needs to participate in to make that critical tipping point. Does that make sense to you? Just nod your head if it makes some sense. So the techniques that I will bring to you that have worked in miraculous ways, I've seen it happen over and over again. There's no guarantee that even if you become very masterful at difficult conversations, that you'll reach somebody or they'll change their point of view. But the possibility of having that engagement, that connection, where you learn from each other, where you understand each other, where you meet each other in a way that is honoring and respectful, then the possibility of reaching some consensus, some action, some compromise, being able to learn some things from each other, then that exists. But if we're just talking at each other, and I'm right and you're wrong, and they believe the same thing, they're right and you're wrong, we just miss each other and nothing gets healed or brought together in a powerful way. So I think it's Saturday the 14th and Saturday the 21st from 2:30 to 5:30 in the afternoon, 3 hours each session. And it's going to be at the Medford Public Library in the Carpenter Room. And I believe Kathy will send out a flyer that we made, so you'll have all the details, and there'll be a registration link and all of that. And we can all improve our ability to communicate, especially with folks that may not share our same points of view. How many of you think that you'd be interested in learning some of those skills? You just put your hand up if you think that would be helpful in your life. You know, we just had Thanksgiving. How many of you had a family member that, you know, you just don't bring up that subject anymore? Those kinds of things. Yeah, well, good. I'm glad. I want to offer what I've learned. I want to pass it on and share it. And hopefully it will serve our care for our earth, our care for our environment, and make us, and of course it's to be used. These skills can be used in any dialogue, in any difficult conversation. So you can use it for the environmental cause, but you can use it for everything else in your life as well. So thank you for your time. I hope I'll see you in January. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll get to them in a bit. So thank you.
Before we go to questions, quick comment, Alan?
Yeah, I think it's those of us who've spent time engaging with politicians in Salem, some of whom are totally antithetical to everything we understand to be reality. I will confess I've had a great deal of difficulty talking with these folks, and it's those skills that will really help us if we're going to solve the climate crisis. We really need this to be an action, these to be actions that all of us take. And our goal is to try and reach out to folks who don't buy the science and get them. I confess I have an ulterior motive. It's not just to love everybody. It's actually to solve the climate crisis for our kids, for all life on the planet. And I'm hoping that with Warren's help, I'll learn how to do this a little better.
Mm-hmm.
And
I learn every time. I learn every time as well, you know, because I have my trigger points. I have my hot buttons and all that.
If I can, before we go to Kathy's Q&A and Kathy's wrap up, we didn't do this, and I'm going to have to apologize to Eleanor, because Eleanor Ponomareff is our other elected official here. Eleanor's on the Talent City Council. She was returned. I think it was a screaming victory, wasn't it, by 20 votes or something, Eleanor?
So that was the mayor's margin. It's currently under 1%, and there's still some votes trickling in. The rest of the council.
Was a screamer, 100 votes, was it?
Yeah, mine was about 100.
Yeah.
Out of 2,500 votes.
Why did anybody worry about you, Eleanor? But thank you very much indeed, Eleanor. And we're glad the wolves in sheep's clothing didn't eat you up.
Let's go to Ellie now. Questions, Ellie?
Yeah, there's a few. So John brought up a point about microplastics and mentioned that we need filters on our water discharge that can be cleaned to remove microplastics in all new and existing washing machines. So a question for Pam, kind of out of this, is are there any bills or talk about taking action to address microplastics issues and the plastic crisis in general at state level?
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, John. I am sure there will be. I don't know what those bills are at the moment. We have 60 members in the House and another 30 members in the Senate. And we won't have a very good idea of what all the bills are that are being suggested until they really start to drop in the beginning of January. Plastics definitely continues to be an issue of a lot of concern. More of my personal work tends to be focused on climate related issues because that's sort of my personal #1 priority. So I'm not as familiar with what's going on the plastics. However, this also is probably a good point to note that that the issue associated with this question, that is water, will continue to be a huge issue in the legislature. We will have a committee that has water specifically as part of its mission. So those water bills won't come through my committee. But we're in a state that has drought. I think we had 19 counties this year that declared drought and something like 26 last year. We know that water is an existential crisis across the state, and we are going to have to look at how we monitor water, how we respond to shortages, how we encourage conservation, how we support our agricultural industries in making good choices that can also be climate-friendly ones. So a whole lot of work expected to happen around water. And frankly, this is another area in which I think the new governor is going to really need to step up, because without very focused, specific leadership at the governor's level, it's going to be hard for us to have a comprehensive enough policy that actually makes a difference. And so I'm hoping she will do so.
Great, thank you, Pam. All right, I think my internet's a little unstable. Wave if you can't hear me. I'm going to continue on. Just a little plug here from Kathy that SOCAN's federal and state project monitors state legislation and offers testimony. So if anyone's interested in joining that team, please contact Alan. And that's in the chat. So if you need to know his email, it's there. Let's see. All right, another question for Pam here from Ro Lewis. Ro wants to know, what do you think of Medford supporting lawsuit against the state to stop climate action from Governor Brown? Anything we can do?
Well, the background on that is part of that executive order that I referred to earlier required all the state agencies to step up and take some specific climate actions. And in the case of our land use and development agency, there was the development of what was known as climate-friendly cities legislation, or it's not legislation, it's actually a program that was developed through LCDC. It requires cities above a certain population threshold to initiate certain changes in their land use system. The whole intention here is going to be familiar to all of you because we've been talking about this for years. That is to build as densely as possible, to situate housing near transit and other kinds of uses. It's a big, complicated program, but the cities complained from the very start. And I'm a little bit sympathetic to their timing question. We're asking cities to do a lot right now on the planning front, and they thought they were being pushed too quickly, or at least more quickly than they could manage. But unfortunately, a handful of cities, including Medford, have stepped up to first make a formal objection to the unrolling of the program and then to file suit. They continue to say they're not against the objectives of the program, but they don't like the way it's implemented. And while I haven't dived in to really understand the specifics of their objections, and there may be people on here who know more about that than I do, one of the big areas is frankly parking. The program, that's the rules that have been put forward by the state state that cities can't implement minimum parking requirements. And you all know how we feel about parking in some of our suburban communities. The cities will argue that if they can't require parking, that developments will instead choose to locate in outlying areas. I don't think that's true. Just because you're not requiring parking doesn't mean that a smart developer won't build the adequate amount of parking that he or she needs for a development. So I can't say that I yet fully understand, or certainly don't endorse the logic. What can residents do about Medford? I think people in particular who are residents of Medford can be following this at the city council and providing input on the question of how you want the city to actually approach these issues of climate. I will say for the most part, I think the planning departments in Medford are doing a pretty good job embracing a lot of a lot of values that I support. They're doing a lot around housing. They are doing a lot in their downtown core. I think they just need to be encouraged to really make incorporating climate considerations an ongoing part of their work. And I would welcome anybody who knows more than I do about the nature of the objections to the climate program to speak up.
All right, the next question is for Karen. Another question for Pam. Is there anything coming down the pipeline surrounding, sorry, my chat just jumped here. So many questions coming in. Thank you all. About electrifying public transportation or other transportation issues such as more affordable EVs.
I think you will definitely continue to see work happen on the EV front. In 2022, we passed a fair amount of funding to make sure that we were able to get EV subsidies and EV infrastructure to lower income residents and into neighborhoods that maybe wouldn't have been first in line to get that infrastructure. Because we know in order for EVs to really take over the world, they've got to be accessible to people all across the state, all across the world. The transportation legislation will most likely also not go through my committee, although it's certainly the motivation for it are climate considerations, but most likely go through the transportation committee. Sometimes that's been problematic because the transportation committee tends to be populated with people who are more about transportation and building things and less about the public transportation side of the ledger. But that's changing over time. I have a colleague, Rep. Kahn from Portland, who is really positioning herself to be the environmental transportation voice in the legislature. So listen to Rep. Pham over time. Look out for what she's saying, because I think she's going to really drive that conversation around the electrification of transportation. And not only that, with the general approach that we have taken in the past to pour money into the infrastructure that serves cars and less into the infrastructure that serves people on bikes and skateboards. So watch for Rep. Pham.
Thank you. Doug has a question for you, Pam. Do you expect IRA rebates for heat pumps to require state legislation before the Oregon Department of Energy can proceed?
I think there are going to be multiple buckets that can support heat pump deployment. And again, this is another area where I bet there are people on this call who know more than I do. We are all struggling to try to figure out what the heck is in that IRA and how to use it. My understanding is that tax credits for electric heat pumps may be available as soon as the beginning of next year. There's no reason that we would need to take any action as a state if those are federal tax credits available to people. But there are also different programs. There are different buckets in the IRA, as I understand it. There's an electrification bucket. There may be programs that the state can specifically apply for different purposes. So again, that's all part of what we are trying to figure out and what we want. And I'm pushing the agencies to get me some answers to what kinds of systems we need to set up in the legislative, as part of the legislative session, so that we are really ready to grab as much money as we can for Oregonians. But I think some of those systems will require us to do something, but other things like tax credits, if you are savvy enough to know how to do this yourself and able to afford a system with the benefit of a tax credit, nothing will be stopping you.
Thank you. This is a question for Warren from John. Is there something that you can demonstrate for us tonight that will help us to better communicate with the other perspective? Maybe a little taste of what you're going to do in January.
Sure. Well, the main tool that we'll be learning cannot be delivered in a 1 minute or 2 minute thing. But if I could give you a tip, often along with the technique is the energy that you bring to the conversation. If you already start with an agenda that says my job in this conversation is to make the other person agree with me, you're already in the problem. You're already, what I would suggest is you start with an energy of curiosity, you know, where you get, there's another human being just like you, fears, hopes, dreams, histories, all kinds of things. And if you enter the conversation with curiosity, I want to know more about what you are seeing, what you care about, rather than I'm here to convince you or change your mind or do that, because that is what kind of creates the separation. So that's more of a tip, not really a demonstration, but it's a little bit of a tip, because energy is part of it. You'll learn not only about your energy, but you'll also learn techniques. So I hope that's enough for tonight's to answer that question. Okay.
Thank you, Warren. Yeah, I think it's a really important part of this conversation. We can celebrate some victories in the election, and but also kind of keep in mind what Alan said about the way to move forward and trying to reach across the aisle and have more productive conversation. That's great. Thank you. Kathy also wanted me to ask you a little clarifying question about the workshop that's going to be taking place. It's a two-part workshop. So if you're thinking about signing up, do you need to make sure that you can be available for the two? Are they building on each other, or can you just attend one? Could you explain that a little bit?
Yes, yes, and yes, and yes. Oh, no. It is designed in two modules. The first module would be a requirement because you're actually, I'm going to deliver you the tool and the context and the overview of it. But then there's the practicing of it. And what people find is when the tool looks simple, but when you get into the conversation actually that's heated and you go off path, you get triggered or you get upset or you get angry or you get something, you run into things that are the refinements. It requires you to hold your space in a certain way when things don't go so easily, because you are going to engage with a difficult topic where there may be very differing points of view or different things that you may believe are untrue, all of those kinds of things, even accusations. And so the second session is what has happened when you've tried to use the tool. Where did you get off track? And that is very, very critical to having it be incorporated into your way of dialoguing, your way of conversing. So I highly suggest both sessions, but I think you can't just come to the second session because you won't have seen the tool introduced. So first would be absolutely required, and then you'll be on your own to do the best you can. Second session will help you kind of incorporate it, see where the trigger points are, and get more facile at using it, so you feel more confident. So highly suggest both sessions, and so I hope that answers the question.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, Warren. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it off to Kathy to wrap us up. I know we didn't get to all of your questions. I think we might stay a little bit after if you have a really burning question. A lot of those questions were for Pam. So maybe Pam, do you want to just take a second of what's the best way for people to reach out to you with questions or concerns that they have?
Well, people are always welcome to email me. I'll put my email in the chat, but you're also welcome to telephone me. I'll put my cell phone in there as well. Always, this is such a terrific group. And I just want to emphasize that the reason we are able to pass things at the state level is because we have this baseline of passionate, effective supporters out in communities who are willing to step up and who will have our backs when we go out on the edge. So I just can't express my gratitude enough for SOCAN and all of you who are constantly doing the work.
Thank you, Ken. Go ahead, Kathy.
Sorry, my screens jump around when I start sharing here. So if you're not muted now, maybe mute again if you would. And I'd like to thank our three presenters tonight. We felt like talking about the results of the election and where we're going next is really important. And so understanding a bit about federal, state, and local. But then we also thought that we can't go forward if we keep doing things the same we have been. And that's when we met Warren and thought that this helping us understand how to communicate with others is something that's really going to move us forward. So thinking that that's a really important part of Now What. So I have just a few comments. I've tried to shorten this a bit. We've made a place on the website. It's called socan.eco/monthly meetings actions. And we've pulled out the meetings that we have with the action pages we've been creating. And that link is in the email that was sent to you. And so the one for tonight is the election 2022 Now What? And that link will take you to ideas of actions that you can take. I'd like to encourage you, if you don't already receive SOCAN's monthly broadcast and reminder, you can sign up for that by going to socan.eco. And then on the right side, there's a place to sign up, and we send 2 or 3 emails per month. So we don't send you a lot of different emails. The next things I'm going to talk about are on SOCAN's event page. So socan.eco/events for any of the details of these. One of our programs is a government program. Under that, the County and City Project. That main project group will meet on December 15th. That's a Zoom meeting. And if you go to the calendar, you'll get the Zoom link and more information. Within the County City Project, sorry about the dog, our action teams and the Medford action team will meet on Friday, December 2nd at 5:30. That's a Zoom meeting. Within the government program, also the federal and state project will meet on Monday, December 12th. The natural resources program has the forest and fire project. That group will meet on Wednesday, November 16th. And anybody is welcome to come to any of these meetings and participate at whatever level you want. Under the education program, we're actually getting into full speed with the Master Climate Protector for 2023. That will start on February 6th. That's a 10-week course, meets 3 hours each week, and it will be in person at the Higher Education Center in Medford. So we are receiving registrations for that. Encourage you to register if you're interested. We've just worked out with SOU that if you're a student there, you can get college credit for joining the Master Climate Protector, and we're talking to RCC to see if we can work something out there also. Under the community engagement program, we have SOCAN at Mountain Meadows, which meets in person on Tuesday, December 6th. Sustaining Climate Activists is on Zoom, and that is Saturday, December 17th. And in December, we will not have a monthly meeting. So our next monthly meeting will be in January. We have a couple of special programs that are coming up, want you to have on your calendar. The one you've heard about, Mastering the Art of Difficult Conversations, in January. And also the Jacksonville Action Team is putting together Solar Power for Jacksonville Residents, an information session on community solar. Anybody on Pacific Power, this is relevant to you. So if you're on Pacific Power and want to join us for that, it's in person at the Medford Library. And Ray Sanchez Pescador from Solarized Road is going to do that presentation. Other groups, Southern Oregon Citizens Climate Lobby has their December Climate Conference, December 3rd and 4th, and that's a virtual conference. I linked that from SOCAN's Facebook page, or you can email Dylan Hinson if you want more information on that. And the Rogue Valley Voice now has their December climate action calendar up. So if you go to their page, roguevalleyvoice.com, and then one of the boxes down just a little ways is their climate action calendar. I'd like to say a very big thanks to our speakers for being here tonight, sharing this information. I think we were all concerned about the election, and there's still a lot of work to be done, and it needs all of us. But thank you for sharing and giving us some idea of direction we might go. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight and sharing this information. But realize it only works if you take action. So encourage you to talk to others. Go to socan.eco/monthly meetings actions and check out those links on how you can connect with people. We really need to be telling our legislators now and when the session starts how important action on climate is to us, and it takes all of us to do that. A survey was sent to you by email. If you can take the 2 minutes you need to fill that out, it would be very helpful. It gives you also a link to sign up for the workshop if you want to do that. SOCAN website, socan.eco, questions, info@socan.eco. And we all depend on you to help us financially. So if we didn't send out a Giving Tuesday note, so this is your Giving Tuesday to please consider SOCAN if you have the resources to donate. And again, thanks to all of you. We'll hang around for a few minutes if somebody has questions they want to ask, and we'll either answer or get the answers for you. So thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop the recording, and but we will still stay.